something like that. But I'm just trying to get this one down, right? So what is it that, you've learned in that process of traveling and sort of looking for different strategies? Because I'm sure as you've probably done just like I have, when you want to learn a language, there's all these resources, you Google stuff and you try to download apps and you're looking for sort of like that magic, like, magic pill to fluency, right? So what have you learned sort of in that experience that you've been able to apply to Spanish and just other languages as you've kind of gone along and found yourself interested in different languages and cultures?
My approach to language learning has changed a lot over, what is it, 30 years. I used to treat it very much as a kind of a technical exercise. You had these list of words you had to learn, so vocab, so you had your flashcards, and you had your grammar rules, and then you just like learn all the grammar and you practice that, and then you plug all the words into grammar, and then you've got language. That works okay up to a point. Like when you're going from a beginner level, I think it's possible to sort of brute force your way through vocabulary and grammar rules, and you get your feeling. You have this sort of like capability of expressing many different things. But when you actually try and use the language in real life, it's a different part of it. The brain works in a different way. I mean, this is not the way we learned our first languages, our native tongues. And what I found, and I think what a lot of other people find, is that you kind of hit a roadblock, and you can't really get much further than maybe a conversational capability with that approach. So I've tried all sorts of other things. I mean, just like diving into every single aspect, sort of doing language exchanges. And for Spanish, I mean, after I spent many years studying languages which were much further away from my own, like native English, Japanese and Chinese and Korean. And I figured that sort of coming back to a Romance language, something much closer to English, I was going to have an easy time. And so, I dove into that. I do quite like the Pimsleur approach for, the beginning of this now. I find it kind of programs the brain with the right patterns and certain sounds. But even so, when you're actually on the street and you're trying to have real conversations with people, not everyone speaks in the way that you hear on the audio tapes or that you hear from the teacher in the classroom. And so that's really when I sort of started thinking much more about the sound of language and how the ears can get attuned to the natural sound of speech. So that was really the genesis of what I've been doing for the last 3 years with Jiveworld and the Lupa.
Can you tell us just a little bit about how you got started with Jiveworld? Because I think sort of what you mentioned, I think a lot of listeners can also relate to, is this idea that, people think that Spanish is an easy language to learn because there are so many cognates and words borrowed, and there's so many Romance languages that are similar you can borrow a lot from and use that experience with. But I think we find that when you go to talk to real people, like everyone doesn't, talk in this like really formal business way or this academic way that you may have learned in school. So you get sort of a shock to your system when you go out into the real world and you start talking to people. And I think that you're right, there is this plateau that you reach when you've got like sort of the basics down, like you've taken a couple classes, or maybe you've, gotten up to a certain level on an app or something like that you download. That in order to really push past that sort of plateau, you really need to switch up your approach. The thing that works when you're a beginner doesn't work when you've already got to sort of like a really basic conversational level. So tell us a little bit about, how you came up with the concept for Jiveworld and how you got started with your company.
Sure. There were a number of situations I was in where I wanted to do more than just like communicate a message. The sort of language you couldn't like learn from the sort of beginner books and audio courses. But as soon as you step away from those kind of like specific rails, you're into a different world, and it doesn't look the same. It's not just a different version of the things that you've learned before. It's a broader universe. It has social aspects, and also when you're speaking with people naturally. Certainly, if they're not used to traveling or speaking to foreigners, they don't even know how to change their speech in a way that's easy for you to understand. So a lot of the people I was hanging out with, I'm a jazz musician, and I was hanging out with jazz musicians in Medellín. It was really, really difficult just to connect with them on a personal level. So what I did what a lot of people do, which is you start like watching Netflix, like Spanish shows on TV, with the subtitles, and using that as an opportunity to sort of get your ears used to natural sounds. But it wasn't really working for me, and the reason I figured was because like once you have the subtitles on, whether it's the English translation or whether it's the native script, the Spanish, you're actually reading more than listening. You think you're listening because you can hear the sounds, but really the comprehension is coming through the eyes and into the brain, and that's a completely different mechanism. However, if you turn off everything, then it's too difficult to understand. So there was this problem that you're kind of like in trouble if you do, and you're in trouble if you don't. So I kind of sat down with this problem of how can you work with authentic spoken content with enough assistance that still keeps your ears engaged. So you're using your ears and not your eyes in order to connect to the content. But one of the ideas that I came up with, which was original as far as I've never seen it anywhere else, is the idea of partial redaction of a script. So what if instead of seeing all the words, you can just see some of the words, and so your ears can fill in the gaps. Also, a lot of the time you're listening to something, especially if it's a longer piece, a story or something like that, you can sometimes, your context may be completely wrong. So you may start talking about something, let's say a trip or a travel or a person or something like that, and then the conversation has like moved and taken a right turn or a left turn, and it's now talking about something else, but you're still trying to interpret things in terms of what you thought the conversation was about. So the idea of having hints to show you like where you are at a very, very high level in the conversation, so you can start plugging the words you do understand, the conversation that you do understand into it. And from that, basically I came up with a list of maybe 10 or a dozen different ways in which you could help yourself or you could help someone listen to native spoken content without showing you all the words. And then from there, it was sort of a year and a half effort to take those ideas and then create a user experience around it. And that's what became the Jiveworld method.